The man who has saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe.
Welcome to Truth Through Testimony. On this show, we will explore God's truth through real-life testimonies. Each week, we will bring you a powerful new testimony showing the amazing works of God. I'm Landy, and with me on this journey are my husband Brandon, my dad Terry, and my uncle Dan. Before we get to today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and follow us at Truth Through Testimony on YouTube and Truth Through Testimony on Spotify, so you never miss an episode. Hi, welcome to Truth Through Testimony, where we explore God's truth through real-life testimonies. We want to thank you for joining us today. Our special guest today is Kevin. Kevin has an amazing testimony that I believe is going to help a lot of people with hope and healing. Before we get started, though, I would like to kind of just, first of all, thank you, Kevin, for joining our show today and agreeing to tell your testimony. And then I would like to just check in with everybody and see how your day or week's been going and see what kind of Messiah moments we want to share today. So, Dan, do you want to start?
Sure. Let's see. Well, today I went to a funeral today. So my stepmother-in-law passed away, and we had her funeral down in Martinsville, and it was nice. I mean, it was real nice. The minister that done the funeral, he is 90 years old, and he done a great job.
Wow.
I mean, it was. You could tell that he'd been doing it for a long time. I mean, he didn't hardly miss a beat, but everybody got along, and it was really nice.
Dad, do you want to go next?
Well, things are going okay, I guess. I was telling you about the other guys here about my trouble with my truck and all that, and breaking down after working on it for about a week and a half, getting it all running, and first little test drive, it broke down on me again. I think it's something different now, but been quite an ordeal getting the thing back home. And luckily I had a good friend come over this morning and help me pull it back home. And we got to spend a good bit of time together talking about things, and just had a good little time outside in this beautiful weather. It was really a good day, even with all the problems,
Yeah.
So, thankful for that.
Awesome. I was going to ask if you got it home.
Yeah, sure did.
Good deal. Kevin, do you want to share anything from your week, or you have any Messiah moments that you want to share with us?
I've been feeling really blessed. I'm coming up on 13 months sober. And, the first year I spent a lot of time in, like recovery meetings, trying to go to men's groups, and a lot of time in the Word. And, I just got a vehicle a couple months ago after not having a vehicle for a year. So I walked a lot of places, so I was kind of limited. And now I'm working so I can get out more. And, I've kind of, I didn't want to get to a certain point and say, okay, this is as far as I'm going. I've really had to dig deep the last month and say, I'm only getting started on, so I really like my job. It's not super difficult. Like any factory, it has its ups and downs, but, I have a verse that I really like in Colossians that says, do all your work as if you're doing it for the Lord. And that really keeps me going throughout the day. Sometimes people can get down and out, and it might seem like a chaotic day, and those kind of days used to destroy me. And I try to carry myself like in a positive manner, because I think a lot of negativity can manifest and spread. So I try to be that light in all that darkness sometimes, especially at work. Absolutely. And things like that.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I want to be honest with everyone watching and let them know that we are not at our normal recording place. We're actually on the road. We had to take a little road trip to Chicago today. And if you've ever been through the middle of downtown Chicago at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just about any day of the week, it's not something that I suggest that you would like to do. Which leads into my Messiah moment. I made it through Chicago at 1 o'clock in the afternoon through bumper-to-bumper traffic with her in the passenger seat, freaking out, trying to fall asleep so she didn't have to watch me hit the brakes and not hit someone else, essentially. So
That was going to be my Messiah moment, is we made it to Chicago, through Chicago, back from Chicago without incident.
yeah,
So Jesus was definitely at the wheel. The drive
Well, you
last
oughta-
night was good. Driving through the night was fine.
oh,
Well, you ought to try it with a school bus.
I can't imagine. Yeah, no,
No.
we saw a couple out, and I was like, yeah, I know, I cannot imagine doing that.
We're
Yeah, I've been
pulling a
up there
trailer.
several times
Oh no,
with a school bus.
we're pulling a trailer, and that was bad enough.
In the boat, it's somebody else's stuff. So yeah,
A little scary, but we made it, and we're almost home. So
yeah,
that's good. We've made it.
we'll
but-
get there.
Yep.
We'll get there.
Yep. We've had a pretty good week so far. It's been good. We've been busy. It's been a busy week, but we had new community groups start at church last night, and so that's exciting. We're excited for that.
Got another one coming up tomorrow that we are doing. Is it
Yep.
tomorrow or is
Yeah,
it Saturday? It's
Friday.
tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a good week. I've got both my son and my daughter both have doctor's appointments tomorrow that I'm all nervous about, but those will be, my prayers for tonight and tomorrow's. And then there'll be my Messiah moments next week for our next show. So,
There you go.
There you go.
Kevin, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then if you want, just go on into your testimony, and I'm sure we'll have questions for you after.
Alrighty. So I grew up in Gas City. I grew up in a single parent household. I never met my father, so I didn't have a dad growing up. I had a younger brother. His dad was only in our lives for a few years, and then he was gone. My mom kind of worked a lot, and then, when she wasn't working, I didn't really have the best relationship with my mom. She was, I got disciplined a lot, you could say, and sometimes it was a little rough. So I didn't really ever bond with my mother. When I was younger, I just kind of felt like by myself a little bit growing up. I was definitely a follower growing up, and I spent a lot of time at grandma's house. So I'm kind of a grandma's boy. Early, elementary, I kind of hung out with the kids. I got in trouble a lot. But I started playing sports and late elementary, going into middle school. So, I wanted to play sports. So, I couldn't really, be around troublemakers and getting in trouble and be in sports. And I had to start making good grades. So, thankfully, those people that I hung out with in middle school and high school were good people. I'd say for the most part, I didn't really get in any trouble when I was younger. For one, I was scared that, my mom was the, you're going to get paddled for everything mother. So I would definitely try to avoid that. And sometimes it was unavoidable. I was getting paddled no matter what. So, I'd say probably once I got to middle school and, I was always busy with sports, I kind of didn't really have to be around her as much. And so, yeah, I did pretty good in high school. Quit hanging out with the bad people. I did pretty good in high school. I worked in high school. I played football. I played basketball. I ran track. So, I was pretty busy in high school. I didn't really have time to get in trouble. I didn't really hang out with people that drank or did drugs. And graduated high school. And, all those people kind of went on with their lives, and I kind of stayed back home. And, I quickly found myself back with people that I hung out with in elementary school. And, there's a verse in 1 Corinthians that says, bad company corrupts good character. And when you hang out with people and you guys are all doing the same stuff, you're probably going to find yourself in some trouble, I guess I could say, as far as addictive behaviors, when I was 19, my mom went to prison for taking another person's life, and it was hard on me, even though I didn't really have like that relationship with my mother, but it was really hard on my little brother. So he was 14 at the time and I was 19, and we kind of had to be there for each other. I was 19 and I was not ready to, I wasn't even grown up myself. I was just technically legally adult. And, I probably from that time till I was about 24, 25, I got arrested a few times. All those arrests had to do with drinking. I had a public intox. I got caught with marijuana a couple times. I spent a lot of time in the bar. Thank God I never got a DUI. Talk about the Lord looking out for you even when you're not following him. I never got any felonies. I wasn't really like into drugs. I was mainly a drinker, and I was a pretty big pothead in my early 20s. So, that's what the people that I hung out with did, so that's what I did. I was always trying to find my identity and like my spot in this world of being an adult, but I was always able to work for the most part and, have money. I did have a few years in my early 20s. It was about a year and a half, almost 2 years. I didn't work. And, I found myself at my grandma and grandpa's house for a few years. And then I'd get a job, move out. I wouldn't do very good. I'd have to move back in. Yeah. So, I had money. You couldn't tell me anything because I was taking care of my stuff. I was living at grandma's, but, she wasn't really having to support me other than, I lived there. And, she passed away in 2010. That was kind of hard on me. So, I didn't really date when I was younger. I wanted my freedom. I wanted to be able to go do what I want. I wasn't committed to anything, and, I remember back, I used to pray a lot, like, man, I wish I could settle down and find what I'm going to try to do as an adult. And I don't want to say that I didn't believe in God. I just didn't trust in him. So, I was when things weren't going good, I'm going to pray to God. But when things are going great, I got it from here. Thank you. I was one of those guys. And, it just so happened to be in 2011, I met my ex-wife, and we kind of met by accident, and we kind of hit it off, and I was kind of like, okay, I'm done. This is a good person. I think this is what I prayed for. And from the time I was 26 till I was about 30, the first 8 years that we were together was really good. We kind of grew up in our 20s together, going into our 30s. We bought a house together. We always had money. We didn't have a kid yet, so things were pretty good. We got married after being together 5 years, and I want to say probably at this time, this is when I had started working at Woodmark, and somewhere in there, a couple years after I got married, I started drinking a little bit through the day. Now, I was always a drinker, even when we were together, a weekend drinker. Sometimes I got really drunk, but it wasn't really affecting our relationship. We had a good relationship. We got married, and, I'm not really for sure what started all the drinking, but I definitely started drinking. It only started as a couple shooters, but, within a year or so, I was drinking quite a bit every day. And, I would say from probably the middle or probably the whole year of 2019 up to the middle of 2020, I was drinking heavily every day. And it was starting to affect my marriage, but I was really good at hiding it. So, but it did get to a point, in the very beginning of the summer of 2020, it's like my wife at the time had asked me like, hey, I need you to slow down, or have you thought about this? Maybe try to go to meetings. And I got to a point like I had to go to rehab. So I did go to rehab. This was the first time, and I was in that for 4 or 5 months, and I finished that. And it was kind of weird that we had been trying to have kids. At this point, we'd been together almost 10 years. And it ended up being like I came home for a weekend from rehab and she had gotten pregnant. So I came out of rehab and I'm going to be a dad and I'm coming back to work. You know, American Woodmark was very supportive. A lot of people were very supportive my first time going to rehab. And, you know, I was feeling really grateful, you know, for the second chance at life, you know, because I didn't really get this deep into the addiction. But I didn't stay grateful, you know. I relapsed a couple times after coming back. I didn't really take off, you know. I was still had the thought in my mind of being a dad, and because I didn't have one growing up, it was really scary. Thinking about, you know, what's a dad do? What's a parent do? You know, I was just nervous. So, you know, my daughter was born in May of 2021, and you know, I was still doing pretty good. I don't want to say I was like super sober or anything. You know, I'd relapsed a few times. I wasn't really doing a lot of things to stay sober, you know. But by the end of that summer, you know, after, I think my daughter was like 2.5, 3 months old, I started drinking like almost instantly heavier than when I was drinking before. And I had a few months there where it was nonstop. And she knew, and she was not happy because she told me when I came back that we were not going to do rehab again. And so, you know, the very end of October 2021, I decided to stop drinking on a Friday. So I went Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I was at work on a Monday at Woodmark. And I started just all of a sudden not feeling good. And I had a really bad seizure. And that was from trying to quit drinking on my own. And, you know, I remember I don't really remember a whole lot of the seizure. You know, I had a couple of them that day. It was really bad. I don't really remember a whole lot of it, but people told me like I got wheeled out through the factory on a stretcher. And, you know, I just remember waking up in the hospital and they're asking me a lot of questions. I wasn't really for sure what happened. I know, you know, they were like, hey, have you been drinking? And of course I lied. That was a big thing I did. You know, when my wife would ask me, I lied to her quite a bit about that. So I ended up, you know, a few weeks after that happened, going back to rehab. So, you know, I left my wife, you know, at home, new baby, going back to rehab. I would definitely say, you know, my job was not happy that time that I went back to rehab. You know, they gave me a second chance and put me in a good position to do good there. And I remember thinking to myself, like, God, how did I get to here, you know? And I'd always had it in my mind, you know, I had to figure so many things out in my life on my own. I was like, I was going to figure this out. I don't need anybody's help. I got this. And I was really stubborn about it. And I came out of that rehab the second time, you know, in February of 2022. And this is kind of, you know, where things start getting very rough. As you know, I came home. I was home a few weeks, and you know, when I came back to my job this time, they put me where they wanted me, and it wasn't really up to me, and I didn't like it. And then my wife's like, "What are we doing? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?" And you know, I started drinking again, and it was about 6 or 7 weeks after I'd been home, and I'd been drinking, and she comes up to me and she says, "Hey, I don't want you here anymore. I need you to leave. Like, I want you to leave." And I was like, "What, you like for the night?" She's like, "I just want you to leave. I don't want you here anymore." And she's crying and she's upset. And, you know, just the look in her eyes, you know, I was like, all right, I'm going to leave. And I remember when I pulled out of the driveway, because obviously I was going to the liquor store, you know, I'm already kicked out of the house. Why not drink? I was like, that might have been the last time that I'm going to be married. And it was. I never walked back in that house after I left that night, and we were never together after that night. I went to my brother's for a few nights and drank myself blackout drunk for 3 days straight. My brother said he was scared for me. He got a hold of the rehab, and he told me, like, "Hey, you got to go to rehab, but like, I can't sit here and watch you kill yourself." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Dude, I sat here and watched you the other night. And you looked like you were dead, and you were all pale, and this was only from 3 days of drinking." So I went back to rehab, this time I took it as serious as I ever did the first 2 times. And, I did really good. I got into this really great halfway house in Fort Wayne. All my trips to rehab were in Fort Wayne. And, I was thinking, when I was in the detox part of the rehab this time, I got divorce papers sent to me. And I was upset about it. But, like I was thinking in my mind, like, she's not going to go through with it. She's going through the motions. So I just did my rehab stuff. I stayed in contact with her. I got to see videos of my daughter and video calls and stuff. And, after I was sober about, I want to say I was 4 or 5 months sober, she said, "Hey, I need you to sign those divorce papers or I'm taking you to court." And my heart dropped, and I sat there that night, drank. I relapsed in this halfway house and signed them and sent them back. And I started drinking really heavily again for a few days. And I remember, my brother telling me what I looked like after a few days. So I went back to rehab again. But I was really mad because I knew I was divorced now. I knew she wasn't coming back. There was nothing. I had nothing to hold on to. And, I remember, thinking like, God, how did this happen? Like, why me? Why me? A very big pity party. At this time I'm blaming God, because like I had all these wonderful things that a lot of people pray for and, wish they had, and I just wasn't grateful for him, and I was blaming God like he's taking this from me. And, I went back to rehab for 30 days, got out, drank again because I was still mad, went back to rehab. So this is from like, September of 22 to, June of 2023. I went in and out of rehab, detox, rehab, relapse, detox, relapse, detox. Like every time it was worse, and I was losing more and more things. I was having to sell stuff. I was losing this. My brother told me like, "Hey, you can't come to my house no more." My ex-wife had my other house. My friends weren't talking to me. Like I was really down in the dumps. And, June of 2023, as I was coming out of one of my rehabs, I was like, okay, this is the time. And I started doing good. And God was like doing these things for me. Like he did quite a few times, helping me come out of these little situations, even though I wasn't seeing it. Like I was praying for it. And because it didn't look like what I prayed for, I wasn't aware that God was helping me in my life. And, I found out that, I had rectal cancer. And I was like, okay, I can get through it. It was not a fun thing to do. The surgery, it was terrible. And, they put me on these pain meds, and pain meds was never my thing. Obviously I took them for a few days, but I didn't like them. So I was still in rehab, and I was like, hey, I don't want these anymore because I don't like them. Yeah, do they help with the pain? Yes, but I don't like how they make me feel. But I knew what made me feel good, and that was alcohol. So I drank, and I remember I knew I was going to get caught drinking there. So I packed all my stuff up and ran, and I ran to my brother's, and, I lied to him and said I got kicked out. And he said, they already called me and told me that you didn't get kicked out and you lied to me. And he ended up trespassing me from his house this time instead of just telling me not to be there. So then I was like, crap. So I finally went back to this rehab place, let me in there 8 times. Like they gave me so many chances, and they changed things and this and that to let me come there. And, they helped. Like they did a lot. But in my mind, I was like, they're not doing what I want to do. And that's why it was not helping me. But I felt like, God was like, hey, I'm putting people in front of you to help you. You're not accepting it. And they let me in here back this time. And then I got into a different halfway house. And I remember I was talking to this guy, and he said, dude, get down and pray to God. And this was like one of the first times it came from my heart. Like I prayed to God, like, hey, if you can hear me, I'm pretty low right now, and I'm just wondering if you can meet me where I'm at and help me, Lord. Like I'm giving over my will, whatever I got, it's yours. And, after a couple weeks, I landed a really good job, and, I was doing really good at the halfway house. So I kept praying and I kept praying and I kept praying, and things got better. I had to start a bankruptcy because I had a lot of medical debt from these rehabs and stuff. So, but that, that thing was working out really good, and this job was working out really good. But out of nowhere, I stopped praying, and I almost remember, within a week of not praying, I was depressed again, and I totally forgot that I had a really good job in Fort Wayne, and I was in a good situation, and I was around people that weren't going to let me fail. Sure enough, it only took about a month, and I relapsed again. But I told on myself, and they were going to work with me. There was going to be some consequences. And I was like, well, how would you guys feel if I went to a different rehab than the one I was going to? So they got me in there, and they said, you go do this, and you come back. We're going to work with you. You're going to have a few things you got to deal with when you come back as far as consequences for drinking here. But they let me back in. Well, I went to rehab, and I was like, I've done this before. I already know all this. You can't tell me nothing. I started praying a little bit, like, guide me, Lord. Like, don't let me walk out of here and do the same things. And, at this point, I just prayed to God. I wasn't in the Word. So, I didn't know that in the Word it tells you that God will rebuke you because He loves you. And I didn't realize that till later on. That was a revelation of mine that, He's going to set me straight because I'm asking Him to set me straight, but I didn't like how it felt. I was still in myself, and it hurt because I didn't have the Word to tell me, like, this is what God's doing to help me, because all my experiences with being disciplined were associated with punishment, and not being disciplined as being associated with, like, I'm giving myself to the Lord. So it felt like punishment, even though the Lord was trying to set me on the right path. And, these were some of the things I learned later on when I actually opened the Bible and read it. And so I came out of that. I was like, I ain't doing your halfway house stuff. It's ridiculous. I ran back to my brothers, and I said, look, I'm in the worst spot ever. I know you trespassed from here. You said you don't want me here, but I really need somewhere to go. And he said, you're not coming here. You're not staying here. And, the cops ended up coming, and I went to jail. And that was at New Year's Eve, 2024. And, like, I was really down then. I was like, man, this dude's going to put me in jail. And he was like, bro, I didn't want to, but if you were in jail, I knew you weren't drinking, and I knew you weren't out doing dumb stuff. Like, can't drink in there. It's like, that's what we got to do. But I ended up getting out of there after like 5 days. I came to the Grant County Rescue Mission. But I was really down. I was like, man, I prayed to God and He helped me. But then I prayed and then He didn't help me. Now look at me. I was almost questioning, like, why I prayed for things, I forgot about all the good things because one thing didn't work out my way. And I came to the rescue mission, and it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I was like, man, I'm in a homeless shelter, and I was a little frustrated about it. I didn't have a job. I was running out of money. I was going to lose my vehicle, and I ended up drinking here, and the guy here told me, he said, if you drink here, I'm going to catch you. Nobody gets away from me. I'm going to catch you. Well, he did, and he kicked me out.
Mm-hmm.
And this next place I landed at is where I first opened the Bible. The name of this place was Disciples of Christ Halfway House. And a couple gentlemen there that ran that house, they were like really strict. Like, you can't have your phone for 2 weeks. You can't turn the TV on. And it's like, all you got is this and this Bible. And I was so down and out because, like, I was really scared at this point. Like, I'm going to be homeless, like nowhere to go. And I remember going to church that Sunday, and I stood up crying. And I said, listen, in front of this congregation, I was like, I'm down. I don't know what to do. I want to truly give my life to God. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm hoping somebody here can help me because I am lost. They all just kind of looked at me, and, I seen a few people start crying, and, some people were smiling. I was like, are you guys happy? Are you sad? What's going on? And I didn't realize, that I was that one sheep, and I made my way back to the 99. That was my herd. And I cried, and they prayed over me. And, I remember walking up to that pasture, And I said, bro, I just got this Bible. I haven't opened it yet. Where should I start reading? And he goes, well, you could start with the Gospels. And I was like, what's that? He goes, well, just go read the book of John. So I read it. And I liked some things, that I read. I didn't understand it. I didn't have discernment yet on what this was telling me, but it was in there. Okay, and then I read the book of Matthew. Didn't really understand it, but I read it. Then I read Luke. Then I read Mark. I don't know why I chose that order. And I was at that place for about a month, and I relapsed. This one was kind of tough because, I started praying, and, I prayed again, like, God, take care of me. I'm giving myself to you. And he got me a job again. Like, I got a job in 4 days without a phone or access to a computer. Like, I don't know how that happened. And I still had my vehicle, and they were like, okay, you're doing good. Like, you got a job, you're reading your Bible, you're sharing with guys. Like, I didn't even know, like, that I was talking about anything serious, but I was like, man, God's really working in my life. And I was still praying. I was still, I started getting some clarity, and I started feeling a little better. And I started thinking about the past. Like, this whole time, I was still in love with my ex-wife, and I was thinking, like, man, maybe, but, she had already moved on and had a boyfriend, and then she had a fiance, and I drank, and I told on myself again. And of course, there was consequences, and I didn't want to deal with the consequences. So I got kicked out of there, and I still had a amount of time before I could go back to the rescue mission. And I was telling my aunt, like, said, let me stay here, help me here. So I started sleeping in my truck, and this was like January. And of course, when I'm down and out, I drink. And I remember sitting in my truck. I was sitting in my truck all day. I have nowhere to go. So all day, all night, scared to get out. I remember I left that halfway house and went and bought like $100 and some in vodka. And I sat in my truck and drank and drank. And if I didn't feel like I could get out, I used Gatorade bottles to use the bathroom. And it was really terrible. And I had this Bible the Bible that I read today, I actually stole from this halfway house, which is crazy, but I still have it. And, I went back and I apologized to the guy for taking it from the house. And I told him, I was like, I feel bad, but I do read it. And I showed him and all the notes and stuff I was doing later on. And he's like, I'm not even mad. It's like, I guess if that's what the Lord's plan was. I was like, well, I'm going to be honest. Like, when I tell people that, like, you stole a Bible? I said, yeah, I was living in sin. I was like, it sounds weird to steal something like that, but I really liked it. And I sat in my truck drunk trying to read it, but I couldn't ever really focus. And, it took me about 3 weeks, almost a month of sitting in my truck all day, drinking, not eating, praying, like, all right, Lord, get me out of this one. Well, he didn't get me out of this one right away. And I guess you could say me being in that truck for 3 weeks, and then, I was driving one day, and this is God's power, his intervention. I'd been sitting in this truck nonstop drinking, but I woke up one morning and I couldn't drink right away. I didn't feel right. And it was icy out, and I actually slid off the road and wrecked my truck, but I hadn't been drinking, because if it had been any other morning, I'd have got a DUI. But by the grace of God, I hadn't drank that morning, and they breathalyzed me and did the blood tests and all that, and I was good. But then I wrecked my truck, so I really didn't have nowhere to go. So after I went to the hospital, I walked from the hospital to the liquor store, all the way back to Gas City to my grandpa's old house, and he had already passed away, and my aunt owned it. And I was kind of hiding out there for a few days, and she found out I was there. She trespassed me from there. And the cops found me there one night, and I went back to jail. I was already on probation, and I thought this time I wasn't getting out of jail. They actually let me out the next morning, and I was sober enough. I hadn't been able to drink. I said, I'm going to go back to the mission. This guy was telling me about this life change program. It's faith-based, and you get closer to God, and I had this Bible. So I came back to the mission, and this guy was like, I'd been back to the mission quite a few times trying to get in, but I couldn't stop drinking. They won't let you in here if you're drunk. And I was sober, and he said, come back at 5 when we check people in. I'll get you in, and you're going in the program. I remember he looked at me and he said, you're going to be all right now. It's going to be okay. And, I joined this Life Change program, and I've been at the rescue mission for 13 months. And when I got here, I said, I'm done. I started praying hard. I started getting in the Word, and as I read more of the Bible, I looked back on like God put me in that truck and put me through those things. Like that was the beginning of my flesh being crucified so I could be born again. And, I made it back to that church, and after having about 2 months sober, I got baptized. And, I remember you read a verse before you go into it. And I read the verse from James that said, resist the devil and he'll flee from you, and draw closer to God and he'll draw closer to you. And then I got baptized. And I remember when I came out of that water, before I got baptized, this pastor had a conversation with me. He said, I don't just baptize people. I want you to understand what you're doing, and when you come out of that water, who you're going to be. And I believed every word of it. First time, anybody tried to tell me something, and I put all my pride to the side. And I said, I believe you. And over the past year, I've gotten in the Word. I found verses that, as I look back, I can relate to all the things I went through. I started my Bible open here. This verse actually describes my whole drinking career. It's in Ecclesiastes. It says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. That's my whole drinking career right there.
Yep.
Solomon definitely spoke some life into me on that one. And yeah, I remember seeing that verse, and I was like, that was my drinking career. I told you I started in the book of John. These are the first couple things I remember highlighting in this book. And from the book of John, it says, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciple. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I remember I highlighted that, and I can tell I've went through like 4 different highlighters in this, but this one is one of the few things highlighted in this color of the highlighter. And that's how I knew it was like one of the first things I did. And I always remember that verse. And as I got through the book, I always have verses. I remember like not thinking I was good enough for God, and that I had not quite realizing early on, like before I got baptized, like, does he really want me, like, for some of the things I've done? And I always go back to this verse because it reminds me of why God chose me, I guess. 1 Corinthians says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards, not many were influential, not many were of noble birth, but God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things, the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. And that really put it in perspective. He made my foolish things known because I thought I knew everything. Obviously in 2 Corinthians talks about his power is made perfect in our weakness. So therefore, when I'm weak, I'm actually strong. But he definitely did what he had to do to bring me closer to him. And, over the past year, I made it through the bankruptcy. Everything worked out. When I wrecked my truck, I had 3 days left before my insurance lapsed. So the truck got paid for. And I actually got money for it because the truck was worth more than I owed. I got baptized. My brother and my aunt forgave me. They said, look, we love you, and we'll help you, but we can't deal with you when you're drinking. That's all it is.
Yeah.
You know, I had made some really big idols, and one of them was vodka, and thinking I had to have the coolest of things, and I really kind of like simplified my life now, and realized I don't need all these extra things, and yeah. So I've got my daughter back in my life. I missed my daughter's first 2 birthdays because I was in rehab. But that just this past May, I got to spend my first birthday with her. Now, if that isn't God working in your life, and I remember like, man, I can't really get her a whole lot. And I was like, I don't even care. Like, I just want to see my daughter on her birthday. And, I read the whole Bible last year. I still go back to it a couple times a week. At the beginning of this year, I read the book called The Purpose Driven Life, and it kind of put more things in perspective of, God's calling me to do things, and He will reveal those things to me. And if I keep my eyes open and listen, I even pray different now. A lot of my prayers were directed towards me early on, and most of the time it's directed towards other people now. I feel like God set me apart, and He's redeemed me, and He calls us to go out and make disciples. And I'm working on that with other people, and I share, anytime somebody asks me a question about anything and I can use Scripture to answer it, I answer it with Scripture. And yeah, and that purpose-driven life, if you've ever read that book, I have one last thing I'll share with you. On day 40 of that book, it tells you to write a purpose-driven life statement. And this was one of the most fulfilling things I did. And it was like, it took me a couple of weeks. I jotted a bunch of stuff down, but I would like to share that with you guys, because this is how, moving forward, the beginning of this year, how I live my life now, or how I carry myself. So before I start, everything I wrote in here falls under 4 verses. The first one is Matthew 6:30, to seek His kingdom and His righteousness, and all things will be added to you. Colossians 3:23, which I shared earlier, which is do all your work as if you do it for the Lord. Psalm 19:14, which is let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to the Lord. And Micah 6:8, which gives, I don't have that one memorized, but it's a description of what a man of God looks like. It's 2 verses. Be humble, act kindly and justly towards other people. So, just to finish this up, this is how I've started my year, and how I kind of carry myself now in my faith and in my walk with Christ. So this is what I wrote this. It says, through God's grace and mercy and Jesus Christ's death and resurrection, I have found my salvation and restoration. I am sanctified immediately and progressively through the repentance of my sins. My faith in the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit have set my life apart to glorify Him and to do His will. My chains are gone and I've been set free. Instead of telling God how big my problems are, I will tell my problems how big my God is. I no longer have enemies to conquer, only neighbors to love. God's word is the truth, and the truth will set me free and keep me free. God does not bless what He does not endorse. If I'm not sharing what I've learned with non-believers, how much of a believer does that make me? Testify to the glory of God. When people see me, they should see the Lord working in my life. My work is never done. I should move like Jesus and think, what would Jesus do? I don't know everything, but God does, and I find peace and joy in that. And whenever I think have prayed enough, I should pray a little more, because prayer is powerful and effective. That's my purpose-driven life statement.
Ooh,
Wow.
It's a good one.
I was trying not to cry, Kevin,
Great.
but that is a powerful, powerful testimony.
Absolutely.
Yes,
And
it is.
everything you wrote in that statement is so true and just from God. You can tell you now have a heart for God, and that is amazing.
And I keep it right here. It's the first thing you see when you open my Bible. As soon as you open it, that's what I see. before I go any further.
Awesome. So does that serve as your daily reminder?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I get up, and before I do anything, I pray. I have a devotional I read, then I go get ready for the day. And then before I walk into work, I have a devotional just for work that I read before I go into work. And then I have a devotional I read when I get back from work. And that's kind of like, if I don't make time or something happens where I can't read my Bible, or that I'm reading another book that's called Wisdom Cries Out in Men's Group. And I have another book, the name of it's called Chosen and Faithful, that I try to read some of that one and the Bible every week, and then we read the book in men's group. I know I read those 3 devotionals today, and they're always scripture based, so I know I read at least 3 things of scripture that day, so I'm at least carrying something with me that day, because a lot of times what I meditate on is like those things that I find myself in throughout the day. Normally I'll carry them over through the next day, and that's what I meditate on. So yeah, it's very
It's easy
important.
to fall into that trap of constantly thinking about the negative. So yeah, it's good that you put that much positive into the start of your day. That way, you give yourself a good starting point.
Yeah, you're putting good things inside of you.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
the opposite of, like earlier you were talking about hanging out with the wrong people
Yeah.
and what can happen to you when that happens, and that's so that's kind of the opposite. You're putting good things inside of you, and that'll start to show its fruit instead. You know.
Yes, that's very important to me to, make sure I'm producing fruit in my life, because it tells us in here, if you're producing bad fruit, you will get pruned off. I'm not like a big, hey, look at me type person. I just move, and I let the Spirit move me how it moves me. If God puts it in front of me, good or bad, He put it there for a reason. I don't, I've had bad days. I've had days, that have tested me, but I don't think there's anything that I've had since I started following the Lord that I was like, all right, I can't get through this. So
Yeah.
I pray. He's
Well,
been good to me.
you said that one point there that you finally put your pride aside, and that kind of rang with me. Now you're ready to just give it all to God and let Him have control of things. See what He can do for you.
I didn't mention it, I went to a lot of AA meetings, and, they have the 12 steps, and step 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And I did that, step 5, where you write out all your resentments and your fears and everything. And, when you do that, you admit everything that you were wrong about. It's not what other people did. You put all your stuff out there, and you clean your side of the street. And I admitted that to another person. We prayed, so it was me, them, and God, and they heard all that. And I'm saying, look, this is who I was, God, but this isn't who I want to be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it definitely shows the power of God
Yes.
in your testimony, just how powerful He is and how much He does want us.
I love that you made reference to the Lord watching over you when you weren't following Him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That just shows the kind of God we serve. He's gracious.
You had mentioned early in life, you said that you knew the Lord. Was there someone that brought you to Him, or was it just something that you said you spent a lot of time with your grandma when you were younger? Was your grandma a big influence in that way?
No, I didn't really come from I didn't go to church when I was younger. I
Okay.
believed in God is probably what I meant. So, but believing in God and following God are 2 different things. So,
Yeah, 100%.
No, I was going to say there was a time in my life that I didn't told you I didn't believe in God even, but for some reason I still felt like there was somebody looking after me all the time. And that's kind of a crazy way of looking at things. Or how could you believe those 2 things at the same time? But I kind of did.
God had a plan for me. It's I really like the song Amazing Grace, where it says, saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Like, those are some powerful words. Like, sometimes you
Yes,
can just
it
get
is.
caught up in it's a great song, But if you took the music off and you just heard those words said to you, like those are powerful words. And I really like that song on, you know, I believe in my heart, you know, God chose me to get sober and to, you know, be his disciple. Why, I don't know. It's his plan. It wasn't mine. I'm just forever grateful that, you know, he, put me where I'm at. You know, his mercies are new every day.
And now you're here telling your testimony to somebody I think needs it right at this exact time. So, I want to touch too on what you said about he was answering your prayers, but not in the way that you wanted him to, or that you had asked for. And I think that's really important because, you know, our help may not come to us as we expect it to. And we talked on another podcast about answered prayers. You know, sometimes our prayers are being answered. They're just not the way we wanted them to be. And so I love that you were able to see that and pointed that out. And yeah. I just think you also had said you were not good enough for God. And I think that kind of leads into our question. So our question was, what are the biggest misconceptions about Christians for today? And I think a lot of the times people think you have to be this super clean, no sin, just this perfect person to come into the house of the Lord and ask for him to, you know, be your guide and to be Lord of your life. And that is a huge misconception. We can bring our dirt to the Lord. And he'll help us clean it up. We don't have to clean it up on our own. We can go to him and he'll help us clean it up.
Yeah, and I had that wrote down on a card somewhere about, well, I guess I could go off the top of my head, but, you know, if you look through here, and this is why I emphasize people read the word, I mean, Paul, he killed Christians before he came to God, you know. Jonah tried to run from God. You know, you could point out several things. Even Peter, while he was a disciple, was hard-headed, even, you know, even though
he denied him 3 times.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he always questioned God. There's a few things I could say about that. I've kind of, you know, transitioned from I don't really call myself a Christian anymore. I call myself a follower of Christ. You see a lot of, and it's sad as you know, people claim to be Christians and because they might know a Bible verse that's probably been shared on Facebook a bunch. You know, I guess you could go down this 3 question there. There's 3 questions, you know, you could ask anybody. Do you believe you're going to heaven? They'll probably say yeah. Do you believe you're a Christian? They'll probably say yeah. Are you following Christ? And a lot of people won't answer that. And it's not to be spiteful towards anybody or anything. I just truly believe, like, you know, getting into the Word and knowing what it tells you, you know, a lot of the people that I hang out with that consider themselves followers of Christ, you know, how they share and how they carry themselves and the fruit you see being produced in their lives versus somebody that just says they're a Christian is 2 totally different things. And because one of them is boastful and it's like, hey, I'm a Christian, but you don't, so people will see that and they're like, well, look at these Christians. It kind of stinks, you know, it kind of, it might put, you know, some people off, but, I live by the word. That's what it tells us to do. How he tells us to do things in there. Don't judge, love our brothers, praying for our enemies. You know, like things are like, well, I can't, you know, when you get to those tough things, that's when you really got to put your faith in things and like what God's telling you and put something into practice that you really don't think you should do or that you don't have to do. That's when your relationship really gets tested. Like I remember reading that a few weeks ago Pray for our enemies and their well-being. And, if my enemies are hungry, feed them. And if they're thirsty, give them water. And if by doing so, you're be heaping hot coals on their heads. You don't conquer evil with evil. You conquer evil with good. People read that like, well, I want to do everything I can, but not quite that, then maybe. And it's tough. This is one of the hardest things, that I think I've ever said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. But it's also the most rewarding. It takes me back, 2 Corinthians, it tells us not to fix our eyes on the things that are seen, but on the things that are unseen, because the things that are seen are transient, they're temporary, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And that's our place in heaven. That's what we're working towards, getting people in the Word and, have them read it for themselves, because, like I said, I answer a lot of questions with Scripture. And I'm like, maybe you should go read more of it, like don't take my word for it. Because I'm just in the flesh. Take the Lord's word for it, because He's going to tell you, and you're going to get, convicted. Like that was a big thing for me, is the conviction from the Lord. Like, hey, and now when I start getting froggy or I do this, I'm like, okay, is this really what the Lord is putting on my heart? And I'm not perfect, I have to pray every day for forgiveness. But, the Lord sees our heart, like it says in 1 Samuel, He judges us by what's in our heart and not what's in the flesh.
Now that's why all the things in your past does not matter.
Yeah.
And, God says that He forgets. I don't necessarily believe He just absolutely forgets what you've done, but it's He said He scatters it as far as from the east to the west.
Yeah. The book of Ezekiel chapter 18 tells us about that. Ezekiel chapter 18 tells us, if a wicked person turns away from all their sins they have committed and keeps all my decrees and does what is just and right, that person will surely live. They will not die. None of the offenses they have committed will be remembered against them. Because of the righteous things they have done, they will live.
Yep.
It's Ezekiel. That's old school right there. That's Old Testament.
Yeah, it is.
Now, what I think people don't understand is there truly is an answer to almost everything in your life in that Bible.
Mm-hmm.
In the Word of God, there is guidance and an answer for everything that you would need in your life.
Yeah, as far as the important things in life, I don't think things have changed any for us over these thousands of years. I mean, it's the Bible covers all that stuff for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to give your testimony on the show today. Like I said, I know that there is someone out there who needs to hear your testimony at this exact time, and it's going to bring hope and healing to their life. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today and listening to the show. And we just pray favor and blessings over your lives. Have a good day.
It's your truth through testimony, with your pen to the page, you're rewriting my story. Every part and every piece, you are working together for your purpose, your plan. You are knitting together everything. Whoa.